Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Multiple Fault. I'm going to start off a little bit differently today and preface that this is going to be a bit of a shorter episode just because I've had quite a stacked week and my wisdom teeth have grown in. They're hard launching. And so I do just get bouts of fever, feeling hot, headaches, all of the drab shit from time to time. And I've been told that I need to wait possibly up to a whole 12 months dealing with that. So bear with me. It's definitely not an excuse, but it just means I'm like still learning how to kind of deal with a new kind of way of having energy, not my typical energy waves, or like dealing with the fact that my energy can be disrupted at a moment's notice, which is always really frustrating when you've organized a lot of things and, want to get through a fair bit. So yeah, this week's a little bit shorter. There are longer episodes in the making, which leads me to my next update for this week, which is that guests will be coming on soon. Some of you may be privy to this already, but if you are not, guests will be coming on to the podcast. So stay tuned for them. Really exciting guests and stories and info on the horizon. That leads me to my next thing. I really want to start hearing from you guys. I want to hear your opinions. I want to hear what you actually think of what's being spoken about. I really want the podcast to be a channel for further discourse and kind of want to bring in as much community as possible and bring people really along for the ride. Even if you think it's contentious, I mean, honestly, that's all this podcast really is, like, especially what we're going to get into today. Send through what is on your heart. Send through what is on your mind. I definitely want to know. And no topic is too great or small. And you can also be anonymous if you need to. There's that option on the form. So you don't need to, put a name to whatever your opinions are. Well, you will have to in the form, but you can just request for that to be removed or like not mentioned. You tick a box and say that you want to be anonymous and then you stay anonymous, and that's that. Drop a line if you feel called to. There's a link in the episode's description and also on Instagram, which is largely where updates for the podcast will come through, as well as TikTok and occasionally on LinkedIn too. All of this to say, give me your opinion, send me your opinion. I want to know your thoughts on the things that I'm talking about and the things that will be spoken about with guests. Moving swiftly on to our topic for today. It's a really meaty topic, but I'm going to condense it down, and that is economics. And I'm going to talk about how economics is magic. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because discourse or rhetoric that's kind of been going around has been a lot about job scarcity and a lot of economic turmoil. There have been a lot of shifts in the economy. There will continue to be shifts in the economy as predicted by economists and other peoples in society, even spiritual, people are predicting lots of different things and putting lots of theories out there as to what's going to happen in, I think the dates or the years that people really love to chat about are the years, obviously this year, last year, 2025, but speaking of the future, 2027, a lot of people predict that things are going to shift. Key people that I have been hearing things are going to shift from are Mo Gawdat, I don't know. Mo Gawdat, who is like an ex-Google person, and Jenna Zoe, who is like for my spiritual people out there, a human design person, gal, woman. She speaks a lot about human design and all of that, which is a really, really interesting school of thought. I'm not going to go into it, but yeah, she talks about, and I mean, a lot of people in the human design community talk about what's going to happen after 2027. So 2027 all the way up to 2030 is another key date that people like to talk about. The reason why people talk about 2030 is because of McKinsey's reports that they tend to do, or like a lot of different reports that tend to come out around those years, 2028, 2029 and 2030. There'll be a lot of global industrial reports and reviews that are set to come out around 2029, 2030. When I say, the shifts, the timeline of these shifts, that's kind of the rough timeline that I'm talking about. Right now, up till 2030, due to those sources that I just mentioned, we have got these shifts on the horizon, and there's already been a lot of instability. There's been a few different facts thrown out around the rate of unemployment increasing, and I mean, that definitely backs up what is happening in my field. Like, a lot of people have faced a lot of job uncertainty and job instability. Just taking the general temperature, it's something that everyone is kind of coming across, unless you do happen to have, to be, I don't want to say so lucky, because I really do feel like, and we'll talk about this more later in the episode, I do feel like, and I'm actually going to talk about this more in future episodes too, there are new opportunities being made. There are certain old things that are being shaken off, or we are definitely collectively evolving away from. And so today, this episode is marrying the temperature of the culture with a particular economic framework that I learned about last week called comparative advantage, and bringing these two things together, synthesizing them and creating a reasoning why you, or people, all of us, we all need to double down on what it is that we enjoy, what it is that comes naturally to us, and what it is that we like. We basically need to almost double down on specializing on ourselves, if that makes sense. So that's another key term that's kind of thrown around in economic specialization. And scarcity is another one too. I mean, if you want to apply economic theory to literally everything I just spoke about, the reasoning for me bringing this up is because of the ramping up of scarcity, basically, that's happening, job scarcity, and there's a few other things that are a byproduct of that too, which I've thought were quite odd in the beginning, and then because of what I learnt last week, I now understand why these things are happening. The main thing that has been happening a lot is everyone freelancing, you know what I mean, and creating businesses and having side hustles and all of these things, the advent of or the trend, if you will, quote unquote, right? I thought it was a trend initially, but I'm coming to realize that it's actually going to be more than just a trend. It's going to be a very important way to bake in agility and create a level of certainty in the economic fabric that is developing. Because basically what we're moving away from on an economic level is monolithic business structures. So corporations and companies and really large business structures championing the economic landscape, and into individuals and smaller models of business really championing the economic landscape. That has been something that's been going on. And this theory that I'm going to talk about, the comparative advantage model, that I'm going to talk about, explains why people have been doing that, and that's been happening alongside, it's basically a key way to kind of combat the level of instability that we're facing. The other reason why we are talking about this is because I don't mean to hop on, because I did speak about this a bit in last week's episode, but our brains and the hand we've been dealt over the past few years is to learn. But I would say hundreds of years, it's just been about learn as much as possible, take in as much information as possible, and, it never hurts to know more about everything. But then more recently, we've come to realize that our brains cannot hold that much information. Our brains are a very old structure. And so that's why social media as it currently is, where we're just being flooded with information constantly, is actually causing a lot of problems with brain functioning, brain health, all of these things, because it's just complete information overload, info dumping, just like way too much input into our brains at one time, much more than what we can handle, because it's a pretty old computer, if you want to think of it that way, like the brain being the first computer. All of this to say that that's the third reason why we're going to talk about this model of economics that completely justifies things like going with your gut, things like being in flow. This model, comparative advantage, basically explains why following your strengths, following what comes naturally to you, is always it results in a way exponentially more fruitful outcome than trying to adhere to what you've been told is more optimal to do. Like, this basically explains why some people should be musicians and other people should work in finance, based on what comes naturally to someone, where the flow is going. To tie a little bow on this before we really, really jump into the model, this episode is really the nexus of the idea of spirituality and the science coming together through, economics. Economics is a social science, people like to say. It's really it's really the meeting point of these two things. Basically, we're justifying why intuition works, why going with your gut works, why going with your gifts, quote unquote, some people like to call it that, going with your gifts or going with things that come naturally to you works. And basically how the frictionlessness of going with those gifts or going with what comes naturally to you is better for everyone else too, and also leads to your success inside of an economy, regardless of where the economy is shifting, like whether that's, a lot of people have thrown out like UBI, or is it UBI? Universal basic income, I believe, income streams. And some people have really dire straits takes on the economy, and other people have, more utopia takes on the economy. So we're going to talk about how, irregardless of wherever we're going in the economy, this is the North Star, if you will. So what is this concept of comparative advantage? This is from the textbook. The basis for trade is comparative advantage, not absolute advantage. Those are the two advantages that we're talking about when we're talking about specialization in economics. Individuals, firms, or countries are better off if they specialize in producing goods and services for which they have a comparative advantage and obtain other desirable goods and services by trading. To ground what I'm talking about, I'm going to use the example that was in the lecture that I was sitting in without any of the formulas, because I don't know if I already gave this PSA, but this is not an informational episode on economics. Like that little piece that I read from the textbook just there, that's it. There is no more of that for the rest of the episode. If you want to know about the fundamentals of economics, you must go elsewhere. This is not the episode for this. I've kind of really given the zoomed out, esoteric and also factual, kind of macro reasons why we need to talk about this. To bring this down and to apply it to you, right? Let's take two people. Jack and Jenny are both fishing and picking mangoes. Jenny picks mangoes faster than Jack in a week. Jack catches more fish than Jenny in a week. Jack's just not basically as good as Jenny as picking mangoes. Jenny is better at picking mangoes than Jack. The gains that they get by just deciding to, so for example, if Jack just stops picking mangoes and just focuses on fishing, and then Jenny only picks mangoes and stops fishing, and then they decide to trade the opposite things with each other, there's actually more. They've both generated more surplus of each respective thing. Now, we could get into the breakdown of how that happens, but the main point I want to illustrate here is that you make more of whatever resource it is. Be that, in economic speak, there's only four, but there's all sorts of resources out there. There's, money, there's time, there's creativity, there's whatever. You make more from doing what comes naturally to you. How does this apply to you as an individual? Say you work in a job that you don't like. You're doing that job. Say you have an arts practice or you have a love of dance and you've been doing dance classes since you were 5 and you just do them at, you did it professionally at school and then now it's just a hobby that you go and do once a week. But then, you work as an admin person. You've been doing that for the past 6 years. What this economic model of comparative advantage proves is that you will make exponentially more resource, whatever resource it is. You will multiply your resources once you decide to go in the direction of whatever it is that you want to do. You stop doing admin. You decide to follow a discipline that incorporates your love of dance. Okay, you've got to put in some hard work up front, say study or something like that. On the other side of that is resources. So say, be that a salary or something else. I mean, it's a flow-on effect because salary could contribute to a home or, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It just flows. This is exactly what I'm saying. Once you make a decision like that to go with what interests you, what you value, what's important to you, right? And just follow these little love letters, if you will, from the universe or wherever within you, your gut, whatever you want to call it, that leads you in a direction that it's just like the thing that you enjoy and it feels easy to some degree. Once you start doing that, other things will come to you. Maybe this isn't groundbreaking to you, but it was truly groundbreaking to me to find a scientific reasoning as to why following your gut works and brings in way more resources, quote unquote, or just stuff. I hope I've illustrated this in a way that makes sense. So maybe I'll do one more example and then we'll zoom back out as to why this is important for the future on. We've been told this time and time again for decades, centuries, years, that going with your gut is important and all of those sorts of things. But there's a reason why I'm talking about this right now. It will become even more imperative as time goes on and we really start shaking off and shedding some of the structures from our older economic dynamics and shifting into the way that things are kind of going. Putting on a branding hat for a second and moving into a commercial lens. This economic principle also explains why weird brands, or if you subscribe to Seth Godin Purple Cow theories and whatever, why the Purple Cow theory is really effective. The more distinct, right, aka specialized, the more distinct on a visual level your brand is, the more things you will attract towards it based on this economic theory of comparative advantage. And so that's why brands and branding and identities and systems that are cookie cutter or carbon copies of each other don't work in the long term. Well, they just don't have staying power if you are in pursuit of, or if your brand or collateral and things is just looking like the same as everyone else's, because you're not signaling to others that hey, this is unique or this is special, or you're not signaling any point of difference to others in an ocean full of competitors. This model of comparative advantage is the reason why global trade exists. Going back to the Jack and Jenny story, why they're trading, it's because they have something unique to offer the other person. Even if they do the same thing, at some point they were doing both mangoes and both fish, right? Even if they're doing the same thing, one of them has something particular about them that is actually important or imperative to offer the other, which is the yield, right? The yield of the other thing that they do not have as much of. Really, everyone culturally is trying to do everything, take photos, do this, do that, do this, do that, right? And that's all good and well. Like if you can take photos mid, that's all good and well. We are all also waiting for someone to come along who can take photos extravagantly, right? If we're talking about our campaign, we're waiting, and we're looking and wishing and hoping someone will come along who can take photos like just so amazing, out of this world, completely rock our socks off. So then we can trade whatever that is, whatever resources we have, we can actually trade those resources and benefit more. Everyone benefits when people follow what comes naturally to them and what yields better results for them as an individual. So I think I've already started talking about how this applies to everyone, but it's just not really accessible to develop a large corporate structure. And so because of that, and also the technological advancements, I haven't even spoken about AI in all of this, which is crazy. But yeah, obviously technological advancements are driving that. The way to develop a shell, if you will, or some form of protection from the erratic nature of our economy and how it's developing, the way to develop solvency and a form of protection is to go with your gut, specialize, follow what you're into. Do not just go out there and do just cut and dry carbon copy things, especially with everyone's shortening attention spans too. Do what interests you. For me, for example, this episode, economics is one of those topics that people find really, really boring, typically speaking, or whatever. There's a lot of stigma around subjects like economics, but regardless of that, it interests me. And so it would be disingenuous not to talk about this and to just talk about, I don't know. Anyways, last note, if you're a creative, a designer or someone, and you are showing weird things to clients or whatever, I often find myself in this position. Sometimes we get scared, I feel like, when we're in situations like what we are now, or climates like what we're in now, as far as the economy, people tend to get scared and get cold feet and want to do safe things creatively. And from what I can see and from my experience, that actually comes back around to bite you in the bum. And so you can use this theory, the comparative advantage theory, to prove on a business level, on a scientific and also business level, that the weird thing, the offbeat campaign idea or whatever it is that you've got will actually be way more advantageous, in the long run. Yeah, I hope that I've given enough insight into the model and how it kind of works and the optics of it, so then you can start to try it out. Going with your gut always wins. Go with the flow. Counting 10. Have a good Friday.